That's Ryan Sullivan from Tampa Startup Week speaking with WMNF's Gwyneth Dunsford. And there's more information on their website, tampa.startupweek.co. I'm Sean Kinane. You're listening to the WMNF News and Talk at noon. After this short break, we'll open up the phone lines to take your calls about civil liberties issues with the ACLU of Florida. One of the things we'll talk about is the controversial Florida-made radar being used by police. All right, I'm going to give a quick shout out about news reporters. So soon we'll begin training a new class of WMNF volunteer reporters. If you have time to devote to the training and to reporting for your community radio station, we'd like your help. We're especially looking for people who are familiar with news and our community. Email me at newsroom@wmnf.org if you'd like an application. All right, so got it. So when can you hit here? I'm going to hit that once. When you get a chance, we'll do a crossfade between this and the levee loop.
Okay.
So just whenever you're ready. Yeah, like go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and start it. Welcome to the WMNF Talk Show segment of the News at Noon. I'm Sean Kinane. It's 12:20 in the afternoon, and you're listening to WMNF Tampa 88.5 FM. My guest today is Michael Pheneger with the ACLU of Florida. He's the chair of the local chapter of the ACLU of Florida. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right, thanks so much for joining us. And the first topic I want to talk about is something that our listeners may have heard about. There is a new device we're learning about it recently, a device that can look inside the buildings and tell whether there's someone inside. And it's called the Range-R scanner. What is this device? What does it do?
Well, it's a device that basically works like a stud finder, except it sends a signal into a building through the wall, can do it through almost anything except metal. And it identifies any movement inside to include the sound of somebody breathing. It can detect any motion of that kind up to a range of about 50 feet.
And you're concerned about the civil liberties issues here because presumably it would have to go on the building of someone, like perhaps a residence, and you think that they might need a warrant in that case.
Well, it's a very intrusive device because it goes into your home, and there's a whole line of Supreme Court cases that basically is concerned about the government's ability to track what you're doing inside your house. And I think that those are very good. Even Justice Scalia has written a couple of the more memorable ones lately. The difficulty is that these new technologies, and the government has developed all of these really sophisticated toys that can basically be used to violate your privacy. And the difficulty is that the law, the courts, and the regulations haven't caught up with the technology. And the police and the law enforcement agencies, FBI, DEA, Marshal Service, things like that, want to use these technologies in such a way that they kind of keep them secret. They don't want people to know they're using them. They don't want them to know how they're used. And if we're going to have this stuff, we need to set up protocols and laws that carefully control when they can be used and under what circumstances, and probably most of the time they'll need warrants or should need warrants.
Let me give out the telephone number if you'd like to call in and join this conversation. The number is 813-239-9663. You can also send us a text to 813-433-0885 or email us at dj@wmnf.org. My guest is Michael Pheneger with the ACLU of Florida. He's the local chapter chair. And so police say that they need this because, for example, they'll give the example of if they're chasing a fugitive and someone might be in the building, and there's been cases in the past where fugitives have been hiding out in a building and the police enter and then the police get killed. And so they want to know if there's someone in there. But you have concerns that in that case that might be one of the maybe legitimate ways if you can get a warrant to go search this building essentially from the outside, but you're concerned that it could be abused.
Well, it's Right now, they're operating these things without warrants. I will concede that some of this technology has perfectly legitimate uses if it's effectively controlled. But a lot of times, it's not effectively controlled, and it makes a great deal of difference whether you're operating within the rule of law or whether you're operating outside it. If you're operating within the rule of law, a neutral third party, if a judge will say whether you have the probable cause to be able to use these technologies to invade somebody's home. There are also emergency conditions in a situation, for example, where you have somebody holding hostages, things like that. Under exigent circumstances, it might be useful to be able to operate this without a warrant. The lesson, however, is that you have to be able to have this stuff settled in advance so everybody will understand what the rules of the game are and when they can be used and when they can't. And they have to disclose. Right now, they try to avoid disclosing, work very hard not to disclose.
What's the technology like that it can detect someone that's breathing from 50 feet away? It's not like it's sending an X-ray or anything like that.
It's essentially it's a Doppler radar, and the Ranger R is a Doppler radar system that basically sends waves in there, and the reflection, the differences that it detects, will tell the person on the outside whether there's somebody in there, roughly where they're at, how many people in some cases there are. It can be very intrusive.
I want to go to the phone lines, but let me give out the number first. It's 813-239-9663. You can send a text to us at 813-433-0885. You can also send us an email at dj@wmnf.org. Our first caller is Dan from Brandon. Hi, Dan. You're on the air.
Now an attorney, and to be honest, I rarely agree with the ACLU's position, but I have to.
I can't hear.
Technology and of course the extra circumstances. Clearly this type of technology should not be just across the board prescribed, but I do agree it needs to be controlled. It sounds like it's good technology. I think it is going to be a great tool for the safety of police and even the fire department from time to time, but I have to agree there has to be some limitations on it.
I fully agree with that. There are legitimate uses to this technology. Strangely enough, this technology, the Stingray and other things that are out there today, were developed by the military, where I have some background. I'm a retired Army colonel. And the military used these things in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and that's the origin of the things. They obviously have utility. The problem is that they can also they're susceptible to being misused, and not having some neutral third party decide whether they're required in a particular circumstance is really a problem. Our court system and the Fourth Amendment look for the idea that if you want to search somebody's house, you have to be able to get a warrant showing probable cause. And that's not required now, and the police are not getting them. That's absolutely the case.
All right, thanks so much for your call. If you'd like to join the conversation, 813-239-9663 or WMNF.org. You can also send a text to 813-433-0885 or email us at dj@WMNF.org. I'm going to read an email just in a second. I want to tell you that it's 1227. You're listening to 88.5 FM, WMNF.org. We got a text message from the 727 area code that says, could these X-rays, Doppler, be harmful to health? And so I just want to remind the person who texted in, it's not X-rays, it's Doppler radar. Could they be harmful to health?
Not in the strength they're probably using them here. I'm not an expert on that, so I'll reserve an opinion to somebody who actually knows.
Also, so this isn't the only invasive surveillance type of issue we have here in the state. I should add that these range Rs are being manufactured in Orlando.
That's correct. The other one, which is really interesting, is the Stingray. The Stingray essentially is a mobile device that mimics a cell phone tower. So if the police are after somebody in particular, they can go into a neighborhood and they can trick the individual cell phone into revealing its location. And they can track that over a period of time. It's an extremely invasive device. I am told that there are other versions of that which can actually intercept the communications themselves, and that is another device that requires warrants. When we tried to get records of what they were doing with that device down in Sarasota, the Sarasota Police Department actually gave all the information in the records back to the U.S. Marshal Service and told us that we couldn't get them under the state sunshine laws. We did get one email, however, which was interesting, when a Sarasota police officer emailed another jurisdiction asking that they not reveal that a Stingray had been used in a particular investigation.
And so there's a current lawsuit going on to find out more about that and perhaps to stop it if you think that there's illegal things going on?
Well, yes, we're trying to find information. We've put information requests in a number of states to get information on who has the Stingray, how they're being used, and things of that kind. The thing that's worst about it is that the government seems to think that they need to operate these things in secret and without oversight. And they try to not only prevent the ACLU and other organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation from getting data, they also kind of, I won't say lie in court, but they're somewhat disingenuous when they say what the source of their information is that they're going to use looking for a warrant or looking for other judicial authorizations. And that's been noted in a number of court cases around the country.
If you'd like to join this conversation, the number to call is 813-239-9663. You can send a text to 813-433-0885 or email us at dj@wmnf.org. It's 12:30 and you're listening to 88.5 FM WMNF Tampa. These Stingrays that they're using in Sarasota are being produced on the east coast of Florida by Harris.
No, actually they're being sold by Harris. It's a German development. Now there are other versions of the Stingray out there that are manufactured by other organizations, but the Harris Corporation, which is over on the east coast of Florida, and a major defense and security contractor, actually sells them in the United States.
And I briefly mentioned a moment ago, but we kind of went to something else, that the range Rs are being produced by L3 Communications in Orlando.
That's correct. It's, the problem that you run into is once the device is built, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. What you have to do is to recognize the potential that these things have for both legitimate and illegitimate uses. And you have to establish a set of rules and procedures that make sure that somebody outside the police department or the law enforcement agency makes decisions about how they're going to be used, unless you have truly exigent circumstances. A hostage situation, for example, would be a good example of how that might be used. Advanced versions of the Range R, I'm told, can actually be used to map the interior of rooms to get an idea of how the walls are conformed and things of that kind. I can see if you were going to do a takedown of a house that information would be very valuable, but again, controls on the use to make sure that it's not abused is essential.
Do we know of any police departments in Florida that are using the Range R?
No, we don't. I think probably what will be done is that a bunch of public information requests will be done to see if local departments have the Range R. It's rather new. It's not new, it's been used for 2 years, but our knowledge of it is only about a couple of months old now. And so we're going to have to find out who has them and how they're using them. And my prediction will be is that the law enforcement agencies in here will try to avoid providing us meaningful information about how these systems are used.
The information that we do have is that L3 Communications has said that more than 200 of these devices have been sold to 50 different law enforcement agencies throughout the country, but we just don't know which of those enforcement agencies we're talking about.
We know the FBI, we know the Marshal Service, probably Drug Enforcement. The sources that I've read say that it's in great use by people who are enforcing drug laws and things of that kind. But other than that, we don't have any information specifically about who might have them in Florida.
813-239-9663 or dj@wmnf.org if you'd like to join this conversation. Mike, I might as well ask you about some of the other issues the ACLU of Florida is concerned about. Of course, right now, beginning in January, about a month ago, same-sex marriages were no longer illegal in Florida, although there's some question about whether the Attorney General of the state is going to, how strongly she's going to enforce that, but it may be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. Where do you think marriage equality is going to end up?
You know, strangely enough, you go back and you find parallels in racial equality. One of the best and most aptly titled Supreme Court decisions that has ever been rendered was in a case called Loving versus Virginia back in the early 60s, when the court ruled that state laws prohibiting miscegenation, that's interracial marriage, were unconstitutional. And if you read the Loving decision and you substitute same-sex couples, you come up with an almost exact parallel. Now, nobody knows exactly what the Supreme Court's going to do, but it's pretty clear that if marriage hadn't been endowed with all kinds of other things, that you might be able to ban it. But now, all kinds of things, inheritances, shared property, right of survivorship, the ability to make medical decisions, all kinds of things are linked to marriage now. And to say that same-sex couples can't be married basically violates the 14th Amendment's requirement that everybody have the equal protection of the laws. And I think that's absolutely critical. And I think that the courts have made good decisions. There's only one circuit up in Ohio that's come out with a contrary decision. By the time this reaches the Supreme Court, there will probably be anywhere between 35 and 40 states where prohibitions against same-sex marriage have been basically declared unconstitutional. And the court could go back and say that that's the case. But when they failed to grant cert on the cases that were appealed to them, what they essentially did was allow the momentum to start building. And it's kind of hard to figure out how they're going to turn that around if indeed they decide to do so.
I also want to ask you about the prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. 6 years ago, President Obama, when he first took office, he said that he was going to make it a point to close Guantanamo and to try the detainees there in American courts. Virtually none of that has happened. I mean, there have been some people who have been released from Guantanamo Bay, but the prison is still open. There's still more than 100 prisoners there. What's the status of Guantanamo Bay? Will it be closed during the Obama presidency?
Well, it's difficult. Obama tried to close the base at Guantanamo, but Congress made it almost impossible for him to go ahead and do so through a variety of measures that they enacted into law. That was kind of a foolish thing. Guantanamo is kind of our Abu Ghraib. What we should have done is basically bring these people back and try them in U.S. courts. For those who don't believe it, we have been extremely successful in U.S. courts in trying actual terrorists that we brought here and charged under U.S. law, and we've been very successful in doing it. By sending people to Guantanamo, by adopting torture interrogation techniques, we've basically flawed many of these cases to the point where it becomes very difficult to see how they would do. Most of the prisoners, by the way, who've been released from Guantanamo were actually released during the Bush administration. Obama has released some of the others. He recently made a deal to get a U.S. soldier back in exchange for releasing 5 Taliban commanders back to Qatar. All of that, has become tremendously complicated and unnecessarily so, because the Congress of the United States simply wouldn't allow the president to do something that's absolutely necessary to do. And the torture issue is out there too. I'm probably the only person in town who's actually read the entire Senate Intelligence Committee torture report. And I will tell you, all the criticisms of that report are invalid. They say they didn't interview people who were involved. Well, they had contemporaneous records, emails, letters, directives, and so forth, signed by those people that tell what the program was doing and who was responsible for it. Torture was a bad idea to begin with. It's a bad idea now, and basically doesn't advance us, it basically retards our ability to deal with terrorism.
The number to call is 813-2